Alright, have you ever sat down after a long day and been like, man, I can't wait to play Honkai Star Rail? No? Really?
Not even once?
Well, anyway, let's say that you did, and let's say that you really want to play your favorite characters. You start putting your team together, and then you realize, wait a minute, these characters are kinda really annoying to play. Not as a whole to be clear, but each and every character do all have at least one glaring problem in their kit that does make them that little bit of annoying that I just mentioned. From lacking multipliers, to messed up eidolons, to being created in an era of the game where what each kit needed to compete with the best options was simply less than it is now, I mean, there's a huge variety of issues that each character could have. Regardless of the reasons, I do think that taking a look at each character and talking about the issues that they do have is a pretty interesting way of observing how each of the characters are designed, and more importantly, how the design philosophy of characters have changed. One thing's for sure, when you take a look at a character like Argenti and you compare him to a character like Evanescia,
yeah.
their problems are in such different ballparks that you might as well consider them to be playing a different sport altogether. So today, what I wanted to do was go through each of the characters in alphabetical order and talk about what the major problem their kits have is, and also maybe some ways that it could be better for each of them. Obviously, there are a hell of a lot of characters in the game at this point, so what I'm going to do is start off with just the physical element, and hey, maybe we'll make a series out of this and talk about some more elements in future videos. One last thing, each 5-star is going to get their own dedicated section including standard units and even the main character, but I won't be talking about the 4-stars in this video because, I mean, let's be real,
no one is actually using them anyway.
So with that said, let's get started. Since we're going alphabetically, that means we've got to start with everyone's favorite redhead, Himiko. Wait a minute, that's not their name. No, seriously, I can't be the only one that thinks they look like the same character, right? But anyway, Argenti is actually a character that I talked about in my previous video about characters that age like milk, and if you didn't get it from that title, yeah, he hasn't really failed all that well in a pretty large variety of ways. But despite the fact that he has a lot of glaring problems, I said it in that older video and I'll say it again here, the way he's designed is somewhat to his benefit. When your entire kit is basically a nothing burger, that also means that it's a blank slate in terms of being improved. Obviously, yeah, you could make simple fixes like changing his multipliers or giving him better eidolons, because I mean, let's be real here, those are areas where he does need improvement. But with that said, I don't actually think those things would really solve much about his kit as a whole. Really, the one big issue he has in my opinion is that he doesn't have any consistent way of dealing anything more than just AoE damage. And don't get me wrong, the AoE damage is nice, and I also realize that his second ultimate does have bounce damage attached to it, but for the most part, that second ultimate isn't used as much as the default fully AoE ultimate is. And there's a few reasons that this is the case, from it being super easily spammable, to being useful to charging the Hysilens if you still happen to be using her, to even stuff like Currency Wars where you can use him as an AoE debuffer if you want to be a little bit wacky. And while yes, I do realize that he's an Air Edition character and AoE is kind of that path's entire gimmick, I personally don't believe that it should also be what's holding his gameplay back from actually, being good. So, I think the easiest fix to that specific problem in his kit would be to allow him to do extra bounce attacks on both ultimates, not necessarily just his second enhanced one. If that were to happen, that would mean that his second one would also need to be buffed in turn, but really, I do think that he needs something in his kit to make him more than just an AoE slave for the Herda. Considering he just joined the 50-50 loss pool though, yeah, we might not be seeing that for quite a while. Now, let's talk about everyone's favorite cowboy, Boothill. Boothill is actually a pretty interesting character in my opinion. In short, he's a single target break character in a world where any break content that exists is pretty much being entirely catered around Firefly, and while he's fantastic at actually breaking enemies quickly due to gaining break efficiency from his pocket trickshot mechanic, that also means that he has a pretty direct problem in his kit relating to how quickly he can get the stacks active. But with that said, since Boothill originally released, other characters have came out that helped him get those faster, like Fugue for example. So really, while it is a little bit annoying that you don't go out of the gate with that extra break efficiency, it's not actually that big of a deal in comparison to his other, much worse problem. See, in a world where characters are releasing with really strong major traces like Evernight who gets 35% crit rate and 15% crit damage for free, or Ashvale that gives the team 120% crit damage for follow-ups, or even if we talk about a support like the Nova Flared Sparkle who gives 45% attack and res pen on top of that, yeah, in that same world we've got Boothill who, reminder, is a break character, gets crit rate and crit damage based on his break effect through one of his major traces. I think this goes without saying, but genuinely, I cannot think of a more useless trace for this guy to have. Even something like Effect Res would have been more valuable because if he gets stunned, then I mean, he's a little bit screwed. So really, as silly as this may sound, he's basically a character that is missing an entire major trace. And as a result of that, that also means that he does have one of the easiest problems to fix in the entire game. And that's simply just replacing his crit trace with like literally anything else you could think of. Alternatively, to be a little bit more serious about this, they could change it so that instead of converting break effect into crit, they could actually do the opposite and convert crit back into break effect. We've already seen plenty of other characters directly get some form of crit for free like the earlier examples that I gave, so really they could just do the exact same for him and then give him an actual benefit from it. There definitely are a lot of better options that they could do apart from that, for example like giving him a second break bar under specific conditions, but if we're keeping it simple then that would be the best way to do it in my opinion. And now, on to Clara. Clara, for better, or well, honestly just for worse, is basically just a lower quality version of the premium counter unit, which is Yunli. She's got lower multipliers across the board, awkwardness in her kit in terms of ult uptime, and to top it off, 0 bounce in her kit, meaning that she's kind of awful in terms of single target damage. Now, with that said, all of that is pretty understandable, right? This is a standard character that has gotten no help, no characters designed for her, no Nova Flare as of yet, and again, a replacement with Yunli. When you've got a character like that where pretty much everything is going against them, then I mean yeah, they'll be in a pretty rough spot overall. With that said, it's not actually all doom and gloom because we know standard characters can actually get buffed to Seen with Well, and you know, maybe someday down the line it will happen with her too. When that happens, I personally think that the best thing that could be done for a kit beyond, you know, the general improvements that everyone would enjoy would be to give her some form of innate taunt in her kit. Whether it's with her ultimate to increase her likelihood of being hit, or if you use links to do the same, or even if you get Yunli's light cone to increase it even more, she doesn't actually have a hard guarantee that she will ever get hit and therefore actually land her counters. I mean, is it possible to play without a taunt? Yeah, I'm not saying that it isn't. But I do think that not having a direct taunt that forces the enemies to attack her not only messes with her personal damage, but also with her team survival. The other characters that can taunt like Yunli, but also Maide, the recently released Blade 2, and even Boothill, who we were just talking about, are generally ran as almost tank-like characters, where they're not just there to do damage, but they also have to soak up some of it due to their mechanics. On the other hand, Clara simply just doesn't have that same ability innate to her kit, and therefore I think that would be a great place to start with improving her. Before moving forward, if you've been enjoying the app so far, I would appreciate if you could drop a like on the video and also subscribe to the channel. It does help out a lot. I mean, hey, it'd be pretty cool if you did. Anyway, this one should be interesting. Let's talk about Dan Heng PT. So as we all know, Dan PT is one of the two really good sustains that this game has, with the other one obviously being Hysilens. He's genuinely got a fantastic kit, offering large shields and attack boost to one target, not to mention a dragon that you can attach to anyone on the team and literally give them a summon. Really, it's hard to find fault with this kit as a whole, but that doesn't mean there aren't any problems at all. Honestly, Dan's biggest problem is that he's a shielder under the preservation path. Like, think about it, we are on Amphorius, the land of Memosprites, where everyone and their mother were actually getting one, and they can do anything, whether that's damage in the case of Castorus' dragon, or healing in the case of Hysilens. Yet, despite that, they literally gave him a traditional summon instead, and then slapped the preservation label onto it. And now, to be clear, in a vacuum there is nothing wrong with that. Abundance characters are generally healers, preservation characters are generally shielders, and that makes sense, right? Well, it does until you look at the fact that literally every other light cone apart from his own signature that exists in the preservation path have nothing to do with attack scaling shielders, and that is the specific stat that both his personal damage and shield scale directly off of. Like, I'm not even joking. Out of the 16 preservation light cones, 7 of them increase defense, 2 increase effect res, 3 heal for some reason, despite that, you know, going against the idea of having a shield to begin with, 1 of them boosts HP, 1 of them increases taunt value, and finally, the last one that isn't his sig does directly buff shields regardless of what they scale on, but that's the Battle Pass cone, so unless you want to fork over $10 to get it, his options are honestly really limited. So, when I say it's hard to find problems with his kit, that is mostly true. But he does have a problem regardless, and that is the stat that he scales off of. In my case, I was willing to just buy the BP, but not everyone is. And without the BP cone or his SIG, the best thing that you can actually give him is an off-path high attack light cone, which, let's be real here, doesn't exactly feel too great. Now, let's talk about the newest Elation character, Evanescia. Being that she's new, she does have a really solid kit, arguably even better than the main push character, which was Silverwolf 999. She has very high uptime on all of her abilities with elation skills, double stacking her ult, not to mention her Master Fox attack. She also does have really respectable damage, which is kind of expected considering she's a new unit, and overall there's not too much to be annoyed by. But there is one thing, and it is actually pretty frustrating, albeit only if you have really weird luck. And what I'm speaking about is her relic situation. For those of you that don't know, not only does Evanescia get 30% crit rate for free just by existing from her A2 trace, she gets another 18.7% from her minor trace, and then obviously the base 5% that everyone gets, meaning by default she has over 50 crit rate, and it's honestly relatively easy to overcap on it depending on what light cone you end up using. On top of that, her entire kit fully revolves around elation damage, and if you don't know how that works, that means that it doesn't really benefit from the normal stuff like attack or physical damage bonus or whatever else all that much. Like, pretty much the only thing that can actually help elation damage is elation damage bonus, which is relatively rare, or alternatively the generic stuff like res pen or defense down. And really, what all that does is that it makes certain substats like attack, for example, not actually that important despite her being a DPS in terms of her overall damage. Alongside that, the other part of her kit, which relies on stacking certified bangers, means that she doesn't actually want super high speed either, because the more turns she takes, the more those bangers get reset, and therefore she does less damage overall. So with all that said, what you're left with is a character that really only wants crit damage over pretty much every other stat in the game. You don't want a ton of crit rate because it's super easy to overcap it, you don't want speed because it's literally detrimental to the way her kit is designed, and you don't even necessarily want physical damage bonus or attack either because she just doesn't really use it that much to begin with. So as a result of all this, we're left with a character that is genuinely a pain in the ass to get a build together for. If you get a banger piece with 10 crit rate, well, I hope you don't have much on your other pieces. If you get a really good crit damage shirt that has a low crit rate but a ton of attack, well, unfortunately for you, it's not actually that useful. Maybe you got a physical damage orb that is double crit, attack, and speed. Well, I mean, sure, you can use it, but unironically, in some cases, a more defensive orb like an HP one that has the same substats is actually better. Overall, she is just a really weird character in terms of building her, and that is largely due to the fact that she's a fully elation scaling unit, but with that said, she is still very strong regardless. And now, onto the only 5-star physical dot character, we got Hysilens. So first and foremost, I think I need to state the obvious. Hysilens is a dot character, and inherently that does come with a pretty significant downside, and that's the fact that she basically only has one team, or I guess one character pairing, where she's actually super viable. As a result of this, just like pretty much every other dot unit in the game, her kit is pretty much entirely reliant on Kafka in terms of actually detonating the dots that she can apply. Yes, she can detonate them with her ultimate, but regardless of that fact, it is still an issue because she lacks consistency. And directly related to that is what I would consider her actual major problem, or I guess the focal point of her problem, which is her squishiness, or in other words, how much defense and HP and that kind of stuff that she has. Now, you might be wondering, okay, how do those two things relate, right? Like, how does detonating dots relate to how squishy or how much HP a unit has? But hear me out for a moment. When you really think about it, Dot's biggest problem as a whole is that regardless of which characters you play, you still have to wait on the enemy to go for the dots to proc, or you can rely on your detonator, which is obviously Kafka. So in a world where you are literally waiting for the enemy to take their turn, and in a world where you don't have enough procs to kill the enemy before that turn happens, well, the result is that you're just kind of doing your best to, exist without getting slapped in the face by a giant nuke from the enemy. And there's actually two ways that this could be solved. One would be fixing the initial thing that I talked about by letting Hysilens detonate her dots through her skill or something like that, and instead you would actively be trying to kill the enemy before they nuke your team by proccing or detonating a lot more dots than you can with her current kit. Alternatively, part of the reason that she's so squishy is that just like most other dot characters, she really wants a ton of attack and effect hit rate, which means that as a result, her defensive stats suffer. If those requirements were lower, then it would allow you to play a lot more aggressive like in a sustainless team for example, or you could use a healer that has lower output like OhAxel. So basically, it's all tied into her squishiness in the sense that she's forced to kill the enemy before she gets killed herself. More detonations would absolutely help solve that problem, or again, alternatively, if she was able to build more defensive stats, then it wouldn't be a problem to begin with. Now, let's talk about the goat himself, Phainon. Phainon's kit is an interesting one. He's currently the only character in the game that kind of creates his own domain and removes all his allies from the field. Like, if you look up hypercarry in the dictionary, Phainon's face is probably gonna be there as the explanation of what it actually is. There's not a single character in the entire game that does what he does, and as a result, this inherently means that if he doesn't do enough as a single unit, then the entire team that's built around him will essentially just fall apart. Now, in a vacuum, that's fine. Like, if you gigabuff one unit, then you should expect good value out of them. But with that said, the problem is what happens when at a base level, the character you're gigabuffing struggles to do enough. Like, if I pick Dr. Ratio as my main damage dealer or my hypercarry, frankly, it doesn't matter how many buffs I give him, he's probably not going to carry my team to victory. And Phainon is similar. Like, you can gigabuff him to the 9s, you can give him Saridra, Sunday, Cyrene, hell, give him Dan PT as a magical 5th unit on his team. At base investment, while he's not struggling majorly right now, eventually he's going to, just like every other hypercarry unit has so far. And as a result of that, you're kind of forced to invest beyond that base copy, which makes Phainon what the community has dubbed an E2 merchant. Like right now, if you are struggling to clear content with Phainon for whatever reason, I guarantee you that if you picked up his first 2 Eidolons, he will literally double the damage that he's doing and perform to the level where he most likely won't fall off for a hell of a long time. Being honest, getting his E2 takes him from a unit that's just okay at E0 to one that can genuinely compete with certain E6s, even including some of the newer ones. As a result of all this, and also the reason that he's dubbed an E2 merchant, is that it is such a massive improvement to his kit that it almost makes the E0 version of Phainon feel like a fraud in comparison. Like, imagine if Phainon's E1, let alone his E2, were in his base kit. No one would be struggling to use him right now, and that right there is his major problem. If he feels only okay at E0, then realistically that does just mean that he got screwed, and it forces people to invest further if they want to play him long term. Now, is it the end of the world? No, of course not. Even at E0, he can still clear perfectly fine, and he is one of the better units that the game has. But does it feel great to look at how busted his E2 is in comparison to his E0? Yeah, definitely not. And now, let's move on to Robin. Robin is, well, she's interesting. For a really long time, she was kinda considered the GOAT of supports. She's got team-wide damage bonus, team-wide attack up, hell, even team-wide crit damage, and that's not even mentioning the best part of her kit, which is the team-wide action advance. On paper, that's all pretty damn crazy, but regardless of all that stuff, she's not actually considered the GOAT anymore. I do think it goes without saying that part of the reason that's the case is that she was designed for the old follow-up meta, and for a pretty long time, those characters weren't really playable. With Ashvale's release and also Blade 2 coming out, this has changed a little bit, but even in that newer team, she isn't exactly the best option compared to just running Tribute and Hysilens instead. So, if she's not really used in the current follow-up team, she's also not used in the old follow-up teams, then where else can you play her? I mean, generally, I would say she's okay for most attack scalers, but she definitely does still have one huge problem that stops her from being really good in those other more generic teams. In my opinion, this problem is her energy generation, which is only fixed by giga investing into her. This is anecdotal, but as someone who owned E1 as 0 Robin for over a year and a half, it was honestly sometimes really rough actually getting her ult off past the very first one. But she was recently added to the Golden Companion store, so I picked up both her Light Cone, which directly buffs her energy recharge stat, as well as her E2, which gives more energy from her talent, and let me tell you, it is a night and day difference. Before, I hardly used her outside of super niche scenarios like Sustainless, but now I find a lot of places to actually use her. And to be clear, I don't actually think she's a bad unit at E0, just a frustrating one sometimes. So, if she were to ever get some kind of fix for her kit, personally, I would like to see her offering more buffs from her E2, and then moving that energy gain away from the E2 down into her base kit. In the current state of HSR, I do think it's actually relatively reasonable to expect some players to get E0 S1, but when you need E2 S1 just for a character to genuinely feel good to play, that doesn't really fill me with joy. Regardless, I do want to reiterate that again, I still think she's a solid unit, and even with her energy issues, most accounts can still get value out of her. This one, yeah. Let's talk about Destruction MC. So, everyone's favorite galactic baseballer in the flesh. Well, yeah, they've got more than a few problems. They're one of the first characters that you get to play in the entire game, and boy do they suffer from it. Oddly enough though, the kit that they have is actually really interesting in spite of that. For one, they've got a generic blast attack on their skill that hits 3 targets, but their blast skill is actually unique in that it's actually an AoE attack, or in other words, the adjacent targets don't take reduced damage. On top of that, they've got the only ult in the game that actually allows you to choose how you want to use it. If you want a single target damage burst, yeah, you can do that. Or alternatively, you can get a traditional blast attack where you get to do a lot to one target and then less to the adjacent ones. They even have a stacking mechanic in their kit with their talent that gives you a permanent attack boost whenever an enemy is broken, almost like Boothill with his pocket trick shots that I mentioned earlier in the video. So honestly, on paper, all of that stuff is actually pretty unique. And if a character was released with a kit like this in the current day, meaning, with current day multipliers, I genuinely don't think it would be that bad. But the abilities is kind of where the good stuff ends, because the Destruction MC's main problem comes from the rest of their kit, meaning the traces, and honestly, since they're free, I'm going to include the Eidolons too. In short, the biggest problem that they have is that, weirdly enough, they improve the Trailblazer's sustainability rather than their damage. Not all of them, to be clear, but when one of your major traces gives you a stacking defense bonus and your E2 is self-healing, yeah, let's be real here, both of those are kind of a waste. On top of that, instead of getting any useful minor traces, they have defense and HP as two of them, which obviously isn't as useful in comparison to pretty much anything else, whether that be crit or damage bonus or whatever. So again, if we're going by the logic of this character being one that would release today with modern day multipliers, I actually don't think that anything else would need to change with their kit other than simply fixing the random sustain stuff that they have in it. Really, I think early on Hoyo didn't really know what to do with the destruction archetype, and the MC definitely suffered as a result of that. On to the latest true support that the game has released, sorry Blade, let's talk about Yao Guang. There's a lot to like with Yao Guang's kit. She has great buffs, she's pretty much required for every elation DPS, not to mention she can force a hot instance, which is just generally useful in terms of giving herself more damage, let alone the rest of the team. Seeing as she is one of the newer characters released into the game, it is actually pretty hard to find any kind of fault with her until you look outside of the fact that she's new. See, while she's fantastic right now for elation teams, where she struggles is in offering stuff to any team that isn't elation. And sure, she does have OK damage for a support, and sure, she does give res pen, but apart from that, basically all you're getting is a tiny proc of elation damage when allies attack, regardless of whether they're elation or not. Now, I'm not saying that Yao Guang needed to be some super generic support or whatever. Honestly, in the current state of the game, it's better that she's niche because that means that she's pretty much always going to be good as long as elation as a whole is good. That said, let's imagine a scenario where you're a Yao Guang fan and you want her on your account, but you don't like the elation DPS. In that scenario, when you're talking about pull value for that account, her value is severely lessened. And even outside of a niche scenario like that, let's say you're in one where you do actually like an elation DPS. Is it really worth it for your account as a whole to go for a character that you can only use with literally one specific character? Maybe? But it definitely wouldn't be as valuable as a character like Tribby, for example, who can be used in a wide variety of teams. It's kind of a catch-22 as weird as that sounds. If you get her and she's only usable with one character, sure, they're gonna be playable, but that's also potentially 150 pulls down the drain just for one other character. And alternatively, if you don't get her, then the elation characters that you do like pretty much aren't playable, at least until we get more elation supports. And of course, this isn't necessarily exclusive to her, because it's a problem that almost every niche support has, unless your name is Cyrene, I guess, but even so, it is still her biggest problem. While elation is good for right now, it won't always be. And while I do see it lasting for at least a year at minimum, that doesn't mean it won't kinda suck once that year is up. And lastly, let's move on to Yunli. So, similar to Clara from earlier, Yunli is a counter unit, and just like Clara, she is also in the same boat in terms of not really getting any teammates designed for her, or really, any kind of update that would help her overall. She is definitely struggling, but if I can be honest, I don't actually think it's because of the problems that I just mentioned. As a whole, while yeah, she's not performing great, she is performing significantly better than Clara, and also has a thing in her kit that I said Clara wants, which is a taunt. So realistically, that should put her in an okay spot. But with all that said, she's just not. So why is that? If it's not because of her lack of teammates or any kind of Nova Flare, or even something simple like a new relic set that could elevate her gameplay or whatever, then what holds her back? Well, in my opinion, Yunli's problem has never been something with her kit itself or any of those other things, and more so the fact that the game itself just isn't catered around her style of gameplay. Especially nowadays, most enemies don't actually attack all that often, but when they do, they hit really hard. So, for a character like Yunli, and also Clara for that matter, who literally rely on getting hit frequently, well, yeah, it's no wonder they struggle. To put this another way, the game itself kind of actively plays against how counter units want to play. If you don't get hit, then you don't counter, and it's as simple as that. So, with that said, the best thing that I think would fix the problem that Yunli has is to simply increase the uptime on her ultimate. If you don't know, Yunli's ult enhances her counter attack and changes it to what I can only really refer to as a parry. If you time her ult usage directly before an enemy attacks, it gets further enhanced and deals a lot of bounce damage. But when you mistime it, she gets a point, which is basically a guarantee that the next time you ult, you will automatically proc that enhanced bounce attack. So if she were able to get her ult more frequently and spam it so that she would essentially always have that point available, then overall, I think she would be in a really solid spot. To wrap up here, I think it goes without saying that just because some of these characters do have problems in their kit, that doesn't mean they're bad by any stretch of the imagination. Like today, I talked about Evanescia and Yao Guang, who make one of the strongest duos in the entire game right now. One problem or one annoyance in some cases doesn't really make or break a character, it's just something that I thought would be pretty interesting to talk about. Anyway, that's all my thoughts, and I appreciate you listening if you made it this far. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this, more so if you've got any gripes about characters you'd like to talk about too, so feel free to leave a comment down below or join my Discord link down in the description to talk with me about it. As usual, thank you so much for watching, subscribe, and if you haven't already, maybe give my other videos a shot too.